The year was 2081, and everybody was finally equal. They weren't only equal before God and the law, they were equal every which way. Nobody was smarter than anybody else. Nobody was better looking than anybody else. Nobody was stronger or quicker than anybody else. All this equality was due to the 211th, 12th, and 13th Amendments to the Constitution, and to the unceasing vigilance of agents of the United States Handicapper General. The HG men took George and Hazel Bergeron's 14-year-old son, Harrison, away. It was tragic, all right, but George and Hazel couldn't think about it very hard. Hazel had a perfectly average intelligence, which meant she couldn't think about anything except in short bursts. And George, while his intelligence was way above normal, had a little mental handicap radio in his ear. He was required by law to wear it at all times. It was tuned to a government transmitter. Every 20 seconds or so, the transmitter would send out some sharp noise to keep people like George from taking unfair advantage of their brains. They were watching TV. There were ballerinas on the screen. George tried to think a little about the ballerinas. They weren't really very good. They were burdened with sash weights and bags of birdshot, and their faces were masked, so that no one, seeing a free and graceful gesture or a pretty face, would feel like something the cat drug in. George was toying with the vague notion that maybe dancers shouldn't be handicapped, but he didn't get very far with this before another noise in his ear radio scattered his thoughts. What was it this time?
Sounded like somebody hitting a milk bottle with a ball-peen hammer.
If I was Diana Moon Glampers, I'd have chimes on Sunday. Just chimes.
George began to think glimmeringly about his abnormal son who was now in jail, about Harrison, but a 21-gun salute in his head stopped that. 2 of the 8 ballerinas had collapsed to the floor and were holding their temples.
All of a sudden you look so tired, said Hazel. Why don't you stretch out on the sofa so you can rest your handicap bag on the pillows, Honey Bunch? Go on and rest the bag. I don't care if you're not equal to me for a while.
George waved the bag with his hands.
I don't notice it anymore. It's just a part of me.
The television program was suddenly interrupted for a news bulletin. It wasn't clear at first as to what the bulletin was about, since the announcer, like all announcers, had a serious speech impediment. For about half a minute, the announcer tried to say, "Ladies and gentlemen." He finally gave up, handed the bulletin to a ballerina to read. "Ladies and gentlemen," said the ballerina, reading the bulletin. She must have been extraordinarily beautiful, because the mask she wore was hideous, and it was easy to see that she was the strongest and most graceful of all the dancers, for her handicap bags were as big as those worn by 200-pound men. And she had to apologize at once for her voice, which was a very unfair voice for a woman to use. She began again, making her voice absolutely uncompetitive.
Harrison Bergeron, age 14, has just escaped from jail, where he was held on suspicion of plotting to overthrow the government.
A police photograph of Harrison Bergeron was flashed on the screen upside down, then sideways. Harrison's appearance was Halloween and hardware. Instead of a little ear radio for a mental handicap, he wore a tremendous pair of earphones and spectacles with thick, wavy lenses to give him wanging headaches. Scrap metal was hung all over him, and to offset his good looks, the HG men required that he wear at all times a red rubber ball for a nose.
If you see this boy, do not, I repeat, do not, try to reason with him.
The photograph of Harrison Bergeron on the screen jumped again. George Bergeron identified the disturbance. "My God, that must be Harrison!" A living, breathing Harrison filled the screen.
Ballerinas. I am the Emperor, do you hear? Everybody must do what I say at once. Even as I stand here, crippled, hobbled, sickened, I am a greater ruler than any man who ever lived. Now watch me become what I can become.
Harrison's scrap iron handicaps crashed to the floor.
I shall now select my Empress. Let the first woman who dares rise to her feet claim her throne.
A moment passed, and then a ballerina arose, swaying like a willow.
Now, shall we show the people the meaning of the word dance? Music! Play your best and I'll make you barons and dukes and earls.
The music began. It was normal and, at first cheap, silly, false. But Harrison snatched 2 musicians from their chairs. He slammed them back into their chairs. The music began again and was much improved. Harrison and his Empress shifted their weights to their toes, and into the air they sprang. They leaped like deer on the moon. It became their obvious intention to kiss the ceiling. They kissed it. It was then that Diana Moon Glampers, the handicapper general, came into the studio with a double-barreled shotgun. She fired twice, and the Emperor and the Empress were dead before they hit the floor. The Bergeron's television tube burned out. Hazel turned to comment about the blackout to George, but George had gone into the kitchen for a can of beer.
There was something real sad on television.
What was it?
It's kind of mixed up in my mind.
Forget sad things.
I always do.